Charlie Kirk was murdered. That sentence still lands hard because the deliberate killing of a prominent political figure in America is not something we have normalized or should normalize, regardless of where anyone stands on his politics, his organization, or his legacy. He was shot and killed, and his wife Erica is a widow, and his children do not have a father. And those are facts that carry moral weight independent of everything else in this story. In the hours and days after Kirk's assassination, a number of American college professors decided that the appropriate response was to say so publicly in vivid terms that they did not care. One called him a racist piece of something I will not repeat on the air, and said Turning Point USA was the same. Another said he did not give a flying expletive about the Kirk person, called him a hate-spreading Nazi, said he had no thoughts or prayers, offered a shrug. Another shared a post suggesting the death was in some way connected to Kirk's own prior statements about gun violence being worth it for the Second Amendment, a framing that implied, at minimum, that the murder was a kind of cosmic justice. Those were not anonymous social media accounts. Those were professors teaching at American colleges and universities, tenured faculty in some cases. People whose professional identity rests on the claim that the university is a place of rigorous inquiry, civil discourse, and the free exchange of ideas. People who, when they were fired or disciplined, immediately invoked academic freedom as the principle their employers had violated. We need to talk about what academic freedom actually is, what it's not, and what the pattern of conduct following Charlie Kirk's assassination reveals about the state of the American university.
Courage, compassion, faith, freedom, truth. Welcome to Courage in the Darkness with your host, Philip Roberts. It's time to awaken America.
The record needs to be established precisely because the professors involved and their defenders in the academic press have worked hard to frame these incidents as cases of political speech being punished by conservative pressure. The framing does not survive contact with what was actually said. Chris Schultz taught psychology at Coastal Carolina Community College in North Carolina since 2008. He is also a Democratic candidate for the North Carolina State House. He was recorded by a student making a classroom statement in which he called Charlie Kirk a racist piece of profanity and described Turning Point USA as the same kind of organization using the same language. He was fired after the recording became public. His public response to the firing invoked academic freedom, described his comments as speaking out against racism and censorship, and characterized the student who recorded him as participating in the same kind of secret recording he claimed to be opposing. He said threats had been made against him and that campus security escorted him to his car. He expressed no acknowledgement that calling a recently murdered man a racist piece of profanity in a psychology classroom in front of students who did not come to class to hear their professor's views on Turning Point USA was professionally inappropriate. Darren Michael was an associate professor of acting and directing at Austin Peay State University in Tennessee. He was fired 2 days after Kirk's assassination for sharing a post with a 2023 Kirk remark about gun deaths being worth it to protect the Second Amendment. A post whose timing and framing in the immediate aftermath of Kirk's murder carried a clear implication. Austin Peay later reinstated Michael, acknowledging it had not followed its own termination policies for tenured faculty, and paid him a $500,000 settlement. He is back in his role. Michael Hook was an art professor at the University of South Dakota. Hours after Kirk was killed, Hook posted publicly that he did not give a flying expletive about the Kirk person, called him a hate-spreading Nazi, said he was sorry for Kirk's family that Kirk was such a person, suggested good people could now enter their lives, expressed no thoughts or prayers, and offered a shrug. He was fired. He sued the university. A federal judge temporarily reinstated him while the case proceeded, finding he had a reasonable chance of prevailing. The South Dakota Board of Regents subsequently agreed not to fire him, and he dropped the lawsuit. He remains employed. 3 professors. 3 sets of statements made in the immediate aftermath of a political assassination. 2 of the 3 are currently employed by American universities. 1 received a $500,000 settlement on top of his reinstatement. The one who was fired and stayed fired, Schultz, is a Democratic state house candidate whose firing has become a campaign narrative about conservative censorship of academic freedom. That is the current state of accountability in American higher education for professors who publicly celebrate, shrug at, or imply the justness of the murder of a political figure they disagreed with. Every one of these professors invoked academic freedom after facing consequences for their statements. The invocation has been accepted largely without examination by the academic press and the civil liberties organizations that filed or supported the legal challenges to their terminations. It deserves examination because the principle of academic freedom is real. It's important, and it's worth defending, which is precisely why its misapplication to cover conduct it was never designed to protect should be resisted. Academic freedom is the principle that scholars must be able to pursue research, publish findings, and teach their subjects without institutional retaliation for the conclusions their inquiry produces. It exists because the advancement of knowledge requires the ability to challenge orthodoxy, to follow evidence to unpopular conclusions, to teach material that some stakeholders in an institution would prefer not to be taught. A biologist who teaches evolution at a university that receives funding from donors who prefer creationism must be protected from firing for teaching biology. A historian who publishes research on the failures of a beloved national figure must be protected from the institutional retaliation for accurate scholarship. A political scientist who teaches students how to analyze competing ideological frameworks must be able to present those frameworks without being fired for presenting the one that offends the administration. That is academic freedom. It's essential. It should be vigorously defended. Calling a recently murdered man a racist piece of profanity in a psychology classroom is not academic inquiry. Posting publicly hours after an assassination that you do not giving a flying expletive about the victim and offering a shrug is not scholarship. Sharing a post with a 2023 quote by the murder victim in the immediate hours after his killing in a manner that implies the death was deserved is not teaching a subject within your academic discipline. None of these acts are protected by the principle of academic freedom because none of them are the exercise of academic freedom. They are the exercise of personal political expression, the same personal political expression that any employee of any institution can be disciplined for when it violates professional standards, creates a hostile environment for students, or brings the institution into public disrepute. The legal outcomes in the Michael and Hook cases, reinstatement, settlement, withdrawal of termination, do not vindicate the academic freedom argument. They reflect the specific protections that tenure and collective bargaining agreements extend to faculty. The procedural failures that institutions make when they move quickly under public pressure, and the particular legal landscape of First Amendment claims by public university employees. A federal judge finding that Hook had a reasonable chance of prevailing in his lawsuit is not a finding that what Hook said was appropriate, professional, or consistent with the standards a university should hold its faculty to. It's a finding about the specific legal framework governing public employee speech. Those are different questions, and conflating them is how the academic establishment launders professional misconduct into principled martyrdom. The academic freedom argument deployed by Schultz, Michael, Hook, and their defenders rests on a premise that the academic establishment has never applied consistently and has no intention of implying consistently. That faculty speech on political topics is protected from institutional consequence regardless of its content or its target. That premise is false as a description of how American universities actually operate, and the evidence is not obscure. The same institutions that have reinstated professors who called a murdered conservative activist a hate-spreading Nazi and offered a shrug at his death have fired, suspended, investigated, and formally sanctioned faculty for speech that offended progressive institutional sensibilities. A professor who expressed skepticism about a diversity initiative in a faculty meeting has faced formal diversity investigations. A professor who used a term in a classroom that a student found offensive, even in an academic context, even with pedagogical purpose, has faced public denunciation campaigns backed by administrative investigation. A professor who posted social media content critical of Black Lives Matter, of transgender ideology, of immigration advocacy, of any cause the academic establishment regards as aligned with the correct side of history, has faced the full weight of institutional accountability with no academic freedom shield in sight. The UCLA DEI director cited in the reporting surrounding this case was fired over controversial Charlie Kirk post in which he said he was glad when bigots die. His termination was the subject of its own coverage. The pattern of conduct following Kirk's assassination involved enough academics making enough similar statements that Fox News Digital covered it as a national story, not because a single professor made an intemperate remark in a moment of passion, but because a recognizable subset of American academics responded to a political murder with public expressions ranging from indifference to satisfaction, and a significant portion of them faced minimal, lasting professional consequences. Ask yourself the question that the academic freedom framing is specifically designed to prevent you from asking. If a conservative professor at Coastal Carolina Community College had responded to the assassination of a prominent progressive political figure by calling that figure a hate-spreading piece of shit in a classroom, invoking racial terminology, and doing so in a recorded statement that went public, would the academic freedom shield have materialized? Would the legal organizations have filed for reinstatement? Would the federal judges have found a reasonable chance of prevailing? Would the Board of Regents have backed down and paid a $500,000 settlement? The answer to every single one of those questions is no. And the universality of that answer is the definition of a double standard. Chris Schultz framed his firing as evidence of why First Amendment protections matter. He is right that the First Amendment protections matter. He's wrong that his firing violated them. A community college student body that includes people who admired Charlie Kirk, who are members of or sympathetic to Turning Point USA, who are Christian conservatives whose political and moral framework aligns with the organizations Schultz was condemning. Those students have a legitimate interest in a classroom environment where their professor is not using instructional time to call their political allies racist pieces of shit. Their educational experience matters. Their comfort in the classroom matters. The academic freedom principle that protects Schultz's right to hold his views does not require the institution to allow him to weaponize the classroom against the students in it. This episode can't conclude without saying directly what the academic establishment's response to Charlie Kirk's assassination reveals about the moral condition of a significant portion of American institutional life. Charlie Kirk was 31 years old when he was killed. He built Turning Point USA into one of the largest conservative student organizations in the country. He hosted one of the most widely listened to political podcasts in America. He was a Christian. He was a husband. He was a public figure who had spent his adult life in the arena of political ideas, arguing for positions that a significant portion of the country agrees with and a significant portion of the country disagrees with, in a vigorous and sometimes confrontational style that American political culture has produced across the ideological spectrum for as long as there has been an American political culture. His widow, Erica Kirk, spoke at the New York Times Deal Book Summit in December of 2025. She's navigating public life after the murder of her husband. And she does so while the professors who shrugged at his death continue to teach. Some of them on the taxpayer's dime. Some of them with $500,000 settlements in their bank accounts. The professors who called Kirk a racist Nazi and offered a shrug were not engaging in academic inquiry. They were revealing something about what they actually believe. That certain political figures are so wrong, so harmful, so beyond the pale of legitimate human community, that their deaths do not warrant the basic human response of grief or moral horror. That belief that some categories of political opponent are not fully within the circle of human moral concern is not a fringe position in the contemporary American university. It's reflected in the Rutgers poll I've discussed on the show, which found that more than half of left-of-center Americans said that murdering Donald Trump was at least somewhat justified. It's reflected in the Penn State Flyers saying dead ICE agents cannot kill. It's reflected in the curricula that tells 8th graders ICE agents are kidnappers. It is reflected in the Gracie Mansion IED attacks by teenagers who said they watched ISIS videos. The through line is the same. The people on the other side of the ideological divide are not just wrong, they're legitimate targets. That is the logic that killed Charlie Kirk. And the academic establishment's response to his death, not horror, not grief, not the basic moral reckoning that the political murder of a young man demands, was a shrug in a classroom from a professor on the taxpayer's dollar. And when the institution said that was unacceptable, the professor called it censorship. The Rutgers poll, the Penn State Flyers, the Hermantown Slides, the Gracie Mansion IEDs, and the professors who shrugged at Charlie Kirk's murder are not separate stories. They are the same story told in different registers about what happens when an ideological framework teaches people that their opponents are not just wrong, but evil. And that evil, when it's removed from the world, does not require mourning. Charles Schultz was fired for calling a murdered man a racist piece of profanity in a classroom. He invoked academic freedom and called it censorship. Darren Michael was reinstated and paid $500,000 after sharing a post implying Kirk's murder was in some sense fitting. Michael Hook called Kirk a hate-spreading Nazi hours after his death and is employed by the University of South Dakota. The academic freedom principle these professors invoked is real and important. It's also not what any of them were exercising. They were expressing personal political contempt for a murder victim in professional settings, in classrooms, on public platforms where their institutional affiliation lent their views the weight of academic authority. Charlie Kirk's widow is a widow. His family doesn't have him. That is the beginning and the end of the moral accounting here. Whatever you thought of his politics, whatever you think of Turning Point USA, whatever your views on the issues he fought for, a man was murdered for his political beliefs in America. And the response of a significant portion of the American academic establishment was to shrug, to curse his name, to imply he deserved it, and then to claim the protections of the institution he died outside of. We're not shrugging. We are not moving on. We are naming what this reveals, and we are demanding the consistency that the academic freedom principle requires if it is to mean anything at all. Apply the standard to everyone or apply it to no one. Protect speech you disagree with or stop pretending you believe in free inquiry. Grieve a murder victim's death regardless of his politics, or acknowledge that your moral framework has a category of people it is decided are not worth grieving. Charlie Kirk was 31 years old. His name deserves to be said with respect. His death deserves to be mourned. And the institutions that shrugged deserved to be held to account. Stand with us, support the mission, refuse the silence. Find us at TITDUSA.com and the Stand Against the Silence campaign. I'll see you next time. God bless.